Do it right there. Today's presentation is on the pros and the cons of different immobilization drugs. We have three presenters that I'm aware of. I'm not sure if Micheline was able to grab somebody else or not. Rich Beausoleil, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Brie Hashem from Wyoming Game and Fish, and Ryan Williamson from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Each presenter will speak for roughly 10 minutes. After all three presentations, we'll open it up to questions and have sort of a panel discussion on each question. You must use the raise hand function, and when it is your opportunity to speak, please unmute your mic and turn on your video. We will get to as many questions and comments as possible while keeping to our approximately 1 hour time limit. So with that, do we have a preference on who wants to go first? Brie, Rich, or Ryan? If not, I'll just pick a name.
Pick a name.
All right. Brie, you're up.
All right, sounds good. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, and then all right, does that look good to everyone?
You're in. Yeah, there you go. That's good.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name is Brie Hashem, and I'm a wildlife research biologist for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And I'm going to chat a little bit about NalMed use in black bears. And I want to start this off by saying that this is not an overview of my personal use of NalMed-A in black bears. I've only ever actually used that drug combination once in a black bear. However, I led this retrospective study of NalMed-A use in free-ranging American black bears and mountain lions in Wyoming. And so I'll just kind of be giving an agency perspective of our use of this drug combination in black bears. And just a side note, we do have grizzly bears in the state. However, our large carnivore team uses Telesco on them. So this talk will just be limited to black bears. And all of our, the people that were using these drugs were all non-veterinary personnel. So they were our district biologists and wardens and technicians. And just a little bit of an overview about NalMed-A. So it is a compounded drug that consists of nalbuphine, azaparone, and medetomidine. And it comes as a kit with reversals. And so nalbuphine is a mild synthetic opioid that is reversible with naltrexone. Azaparone is a mild tranquilizer that is not reversible. And medetomidine is a potent alpha-2 agonist that is reversible with atipamezole. So those two drugs, nalbuphine and medetomidine, are reversible. However, azaparone is not. But the animals remain calm, or relatively calm when they're reversed, but they're still situationally aware once they're reversed. So some pros and cons of NalMed-A. So probably the biggest pro is that there's no controlled drugs. So therefore its use is less regulated and the inventory and storage requirements are lessened. So that's a little bit different from some of the other drugs that are commonly used in black bears. Such as BAM, which is a combination of butorphanol, azaparone, and medetomidine, which is a Schedule 4, and then tilazole and ketamine, which are both Schedule 3 drugs. As I mentioned before, it is reversible except for that azaparone, and I think that the reversibility of NalMed-A is a really big advantage, especially compared to a drug like tilazole. And NalMed-A allows for good pain coverage, sedation, and muscle relaxation. And that really helps to reduce the incidence of capsular myopathy. And then my last pro, some people might view as a con. However, a slower induction time seems to allow the bears more time to go down gently, and they often find a good spot to lay down. Moving on to the cons, probably the biggest con is the potential for spontaneous arousals. And what we mean by that is that an animal that was previously deemed immobile by, one of our biologists or wardens, that suddenly becomes capable of voluntary movement before those reversals were given. So that can be a big problem for human safety. There is also a somewhat variable induction period. And like with other chemical immobilization drugs, that can be related to the impact of the injection. And so like the harder you hit them, the slower they generally go down. But that seems to be especially true with NalMed-A. And then another con is that it tends to expire more quickly than non-compounded drugs such as telazol and ketamine. And that's because that telazol and ketamine are reconstituted. So going back to that study that I led, so we in 2017 immobilized one black bear with NalMed-A, and then from 2019 through 2023, actually immobilized 63 black bears with NalMed-A. However, I only received immobilization forms for 34 of those black bears. So that's what I did our analysis on. And so our mean induction time was just shy of 11 minutes. But we did find that bears that were injected in their hind limb or rump had a significantly slower induction time than bears that were injected in their shoulder. And that's something that you would expect, especially during the fall when black bears have those large fat pads on their rump. And then we found that the average reversal time was about 14 minutes. That sample size is a little bit lower. We did have 6 bears that had to be euthanized due to either human conflicts or injury. And of those 34 black bears, 6 received redoses, so about 18% of them. And our field personnel were instructed to give redoses if after 15 to 20 minutes they showed no or little effect to the drug, then they were redosed. And probably the most alarming thing that we found was that 6 experienced spontaneous arousals. And that ranged from anything from the black bear starting to nod their head to just getting up and walking away. So not great for human safety. And the stimuli that caused those spontaneous arousals were either attempting to move the bear, so trying to pull it out of a trap or like onto a tarp, or when it fell from a tree. So then going a little bit beyond that study, our study ended in 2023. So I just quickly looked back at our immobilization forms from 2024 to 2025. And our sample size for this was only 8 black bears. And part of the reason for the decrease in use over those years is that we had a really hard time, as I'm sure a lot of you did, getting drugs from Wedgwood Pharmacy for a time period. And NalMed-A was one of those ones that we had a really hard time getting a hold of. So, but 8 bears were immobilized with NalMed-A between 2024 and 2025. Our induction time was a little bit higher than what we saw from our previous study, but again, we're dealing with a pretty small sample size. Our reversal time was a little bit shorter, but again, we only had a sample size of 2. We had some really naughty bears those years that had to be put down due to human conflicts. So our sample size for that was only 2. And then 1 bear received a redose and 1 experienced a spontaneous arousal. And that bear just woke up after it was attempted to be moved. So the recommendations that we drew from looking back at all these immobilizations were to avoid injecting into the rump, which has previously been reported, again, especially during the fall when they have all those fat pads. And then one thing that we tell our field staff to do if they are immobilizing a black bear with NalMed-A is to use a muzzle and hobbles. So we've actually sent out, I work for our veterinary services branch, so we actually have sent out muzzles and hobbles to our biologists and wardens that are dealing with black bears using NalMed-A pretty heavily. And then we also recommend minimizing the potential for stimulation of treed bears. And by that, I mean trying to use a tarp to catch their fall or just in any way prevent them from falling and hitting the ground, because that seems to stimulate the bears. And then the last recommendation that we have is to consider the potential for spontaneous arousals. So maybe don't use this drug combination in a public setting where there's the potential for people outside of the department to be around that immobilization event, just in case that bear does decide to wake up suddenly. So just quick little overview. Obviously, I'm happy to answer questions during this panel discussion, but if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to email me, and my email is right there. And I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen for now.
Thank you, Brie. We're gonna hold off questions until all three of you have had a chance to present, and it'll be more like a panel discussion, question and answer type of thing. Rich, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. Don't have a lot to look at, but I will share my screen real quick just to reference this article. If I can find that share button, there it is. So this is we'll just recognize my co-author there in the picture, Lindsay Wellfelt. We wrote this article in the 2024 fall edition of International Bear News. And so
Rich,
pretty much
there's nothing sharing. Sorry.
Oh, there's nothing sharing.
Nope.
Hold on. Sorry. There we go. You got that?
It's coming up, yeah.
Okay. So you don't have to take any notes. This is just straight from that article, and just going to summarize some points. So typically there was, we had three concerns with dissociative drugs that had no reversal. So tilazol and ketamine are dissociative drugs. They're a class of psychoactive drug that's a hallucinogenic, which results in a distorted perception and altered state of consciousness. And it's known to last after the animal is ambulatory. So that was something we didn't like. It can take hours for the animal to fully recover without a reversal to a normal state, placing it at risk to hazards like water and cliffs and exposure. Also inter and intra-specific strife. And this tends to occur with folks who don't do this work as commonly as we do, like officers. I mean, a lot of them do a lot, and there are some good ones, but they may not be dosing perfectly, or they dose low and then they do a second one and then dose high. So it can be a long time. And then when you're using these non-reversible drugs, it can result in increased staff time, which can be a management concern. There's some ways to alleviate that, and I'm sure the folks on the other drugs will cover those topics. But so BAM is a mix of butorphanol, which is a mild opioid, ezaparone, and medetomidine, both of which are sedatives. It's being used safely and successfully for American black bear mobilizations. All three drugs in BAM have been around since the 80s and 90s, but it was specifically compounded into BAM in the late 2000s. There was some research published on using BAM for bears, Wolf in 2008, Williamson in 2018, and Sheldon in 2024. All had fairly small sample sizes, 16, 10, and 12, respectively. So still open to interpretation. Wildlife Pharmaceuticals, who's no longer in the business, they were the first ones to introduce BAM commercially. And that became available around 2014 and 15. And on the dosage chart, they placed a warning. And I want to read this for you, and Brie mentioned it. It says, use extreme caution when anesthetizing carnivores. For many medium and large carnivores, immobilization can be dangerous for both professional handlers and animals. Some species have been observed to feign an anesthesia response. All carnivores should be carefully examined to ascertain the level of anesthesia and to determine when it's safe to approach them. Now, that warning can apply to moose, and it can apply to elk for sure, but they didn't include those species. And so this, sudden wake up concern, we've already talked about it. I knew it was going to come up. Is just not something I've seen. And as many of you on this call know, drug delivery has a laundry list of reasons why the drug may have been impacted, especially with bears. It could be a projector issue with not enough force. It could be a dart issue. All the drugs didn't go in. It could be needle choice, not long enough. Could be dart placement on the bears, like Brie mentioned, avoiding the fat layer, especially in late summer and fall. And the age of the drug and more. And not waiting for full induction before handling. Again, that's already come up. And not doing any procedures that could be considered painful until the peak of anesthesia. I mean, these are just basic preventative measures and just good practice when you're conducting immobilizations. And so it's my hypothesis that a lot of these things weren't considered during drug testing. And I'll just show you something here real quick. So if I stop sharing that, and then I share this one. So whether you're using air or powder is a big difference. These are your air-powered ones, the Dan Inject. These are your powder charges. When you're using a powder charge, you have an explosion that takes place in this gun via a small little cap developed for the construction industry, very inconsistent. That has to explode perfectly. Then there's also a second explosion inside the dart that takes place to push that drug into the animal. Some of that gets alleviated with air. It's a little bit more consistent, but lots of reasons why the drug may not go in. We talked about needle choice and length. There's barbs, which I don't use. It's great for deer and elk, not great for bear and cougar. I like these collared ones. I think they work really well. And then a smooth one, which should never be used. It just pops out. So that's the first thing. And, when you talk about consistency in shots, we talked about those two explosions. These are air powered. You can see through the dart. When this plunger is up here, it's telling you that it's charged. So you know it. And it's just going to perform like air coming out. As soon as this plunger gets pushed back, there's two holes in this needle and the drug comes out in two directions. This plunger gets pushed back when you fill it with drug. So when it's expelled, you can see that through your scope or even just visually if you're close enough to know if your drug went in. So these are things to consider that I don't think were considered with that original testing of this product known as BAM. Let's see. Compounding this problem, I mean, I tried to contact Wildlife Pharmaceuticals to start sharing some of the stuff we were doing, but the company selling BAM has turned over 3 times in the past 10 years. And so trying to work on reversing that warning has been really difficult. Lindsay and I began using this drug in 2017 and have immobilized more than 300 bears. It's probably much more than that now. All sexes, all age classes, and in all seasons. We didn't conduct a structured study because we had a laundry list of objectives we were already doing. But we did make some dosage modifications over the years, and I'll share that with you. Anesthesia and recovery were comparable to dissociatives on average, 8 to 15 minutes for both, 11 being the average. And we never had any issues with sudden wake-ups, but we always took those other things into consideration, like not approaching too quickly, waiting for the painful things, if they are painful, till that drug is at the height of its effectiveness. I just want to end by saying BAM offers numerous advantages over other drugs when used to immobilize black bears, including a 100% reversal, allowing bears to function normally when ambulatory, more flexibility during the duration of the anesthesia. It's a two-part reversal, which was discussed. Atipamezole reverses the medetomidine, and you basically do 2 times the BAM dose. And naltrexone reverses the butorphanol, and that's always just a half a cc. I mean, it was not uncommon for us when we were running a trap line to reverse a bear after 20 minutes. So staff time was greatly reduced. And it would be really valuable for officers doing this kind of work who have to move on. And it's a great solution to not just using the bullet to save time. Reversible drugs have the added value of addressing any regulatory systems during anesthesia, which allows the animal to self-regulate. Again, we never had those. There have been some concerns about lower heart rate and oxygen levels, and you can use supplemental oxygen, but we never did. And I think part of that was because we prevented those issues by being prepared. We had hand warmers in winter and cool water in summer and careful selection of workup spots. And again, waiting the appropriate time and just being super organized and getting in and out. I know Mark Johnson's Wildlife Capture and Care blog is a good spot for researching preventing some of these complications. So if you want to take a peek at that, and then I do just want to show you this. And again, this is in the article, so no need to copy this down. But we did provide this chart in the article, and it's basically 1 cc for every 100 pounds. Little bit of a change for really smaller bears, where you just want to stick with that half cc. But then look when the bears get larger, you don't need to keep compounding that 1 cc for every 100. It really starts to level off. And so that's pretty much what we learned over 300 bears. And that's all I have. I hope that was useful.
Thanks, Rich. Ryan, go ahead, please.
Hey, Rich, thanks. That was great. It was a good synopsis. I'm going to try to tie this together a little bit. I currently use BAM in the Smokies and have handled many hundreds of bears, published that paper in 2018. And I really pushed the paper out so I wouldn't have to carry supplemental oxygen. In the ungulate world, there's a lot of a push and drive to try to get supplemental oxygen on board. I didn't want to have to carry that in the backcountry. So we did blood gas and pulse ox comparisons in that paper and looked at induction times and recoveries, and what the induction times and recoveries that you mentioned is about correct. Is somewhere between 5 and 11 minutes for BAM. NalMed is very similar. So Sheldon and I was co-author on that paper for Sheldon, and we compared BAM and NalMed as far as inductions and recoveries. We found no statistical difference in the two. Also, oxygen saturation across the board, everything seems, from a veterinary standpoint, everything seems very similar from NalMed to BAM. But having used BAM way more and NalMed less, there seems to be less. You need to dose a little bit heavier for the NalMed, and they just seem to be a little bit lighter overall. The dose is very comparable. It's a half cc per 50 pounds in NalMed and a half cc per 50 pounds in BAM. And also what Rich talked about, as far as those bears get bigger in size, the dose levels out. You don't need as much. And we, like I said, we've handled a lot of bears on BAM and with maximum stimulation. And I go along with Rich on this one. We have seen very little spontaneous arousals. I will throw out a word of caution if you plan on using BAM or NalMed in a den setting. that medetomidine dose is really strong. So that respiratory depressant is very heavy. So generally in wintertime situations, we've been cutting our dose by half. So 0.25 per 50 pounds. And that will maintain some respirations. If you use full dose in the wintertime, you will see significant reductions in respirations, much to the point to where I find there's different drugs that offer better respirations in dim time work. But it's an option if that's the only thing that you have. We don't use NalMed now. It's a little bit harder to come by because it was an experimental drug. It is a little bit more expensive than BAM, and BAM is a little bit easier to get, but it is an option, especially for, if you're managing pharmaceuticals on a state level, it not being scheduled. NalMed is a good option for field staff on the game warden level that may not be in a lot of contact with the public, in a closed setting where there's not a lot of stimulus. With NalMed, you see a little bit lighter, and I talked to the biologist in Mississippi, and that's all that he is using now is NalMed. And he called me about some advice and said that he was having some really light and some reactionary stuff going on with him. So I told him to bump it up a little bit to 0.6, 0.7. And since he's bumped it up, he hasn't seen those that light level of anesthesia, and that's all that he has. So he's happy with it. So to hopefully tie everything back together, I think NalMed is a great option if you don't, if the scheduled hang up for the permitting is a problem, or if you're delving it out to people in the field, that scheduling issue can be a huge issue for some of your state veterinarians who want to put their license on the line for those people. So BAM, in that case, I use BAM every day. It's a great drug. It is very lipolytic, so we always dart in the front shoulder with powder charged darts. So stay away from those fatty areas like most IM drugs. And I have used BAM on maximum stimulus, and that is darting a bear in the backcountry, putting it in a litter, and carrying it out multi-hour, 4 or 5 miles down trail, bouncing up and down in a litter, stopping to take vitals, of course, and then once you get to the truck, reversing it. And so our process time is generally about 3 hours. So if I'm trying to catch a female with cubs on BAM, usually I have a 3-hour window, and generally in a 3-hour window, I never have to redose. So if it's a 100-pound bear, she got 1 cc of drug. That 1 cc of drug will last 3 or 4 hours very easily. There's a few things we don't know about NalMed and BAM, and those are things like, what's our safety margin? How much can I overdose an animal before you see some pretty serious effects? I think eventually what would happen is you would, the amount of medetomidine that's on board, it's that respiratory depressant. They're going to hit that respiratory wall where they're not taking in as much oxygen, and their respiration is going to be really slowed. So that's why we keep it to usually about an hour workup is my typical time, and especially those papers, all that data come from about an hour workup. But recoveries have been great. As the bears get older and weigh more, the recoveries can tend to be a little bit longer. But I stimulise with a stick, or roll the bear over and just give it some stimulus and recovery at about 5 minutes. And that really speeds up the recovery time. And if I have to pick between the two, it's definitely going to be BAM, but I also have other medications on board that I have to have permitting and schedule for. So it's not that big of an issue for me to to have something that's scheduled. The other thing that I didn't hear mentioned is that BAM and NalMed are just really heavy sedation. So if you're going to be euthanizing a bear, you need to have a disassociative on board. And what I mean euthanizing, I mean chemically euthanizing a bear with KCL, inducing a heart attack. Essentially, you're going to need a disassociative on board to do that because of the amount of pain that could potentially cause you. So it's important to have a disassociative on board if you're going to euthanize. So if you're going to euthanize on NalMed, you maybe look for a different option as far as chemically euthanizing a bear. Maybe a gunshot to the brain would be the most appropriate tool for that. But interested in taking any questions, and I'm sure we'll catch up. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, all three of you. We'll go ahead and open it up to questions. Just a couple reminders. Please use the raise hand function. When you do speak, please make sure you unmute, turn on your video if at all possible, and start your question with an introduction. Just tell us your name and your affiliation, who you are with, and that is just specifically for the recording part of this webinar. I'm going to start it off with just a couple quick questions. First, Ryan, just a clarification. When you were talking about bringing bears out on the litter, workup time of 3 or 4 hours, that was with BAM or NalMed?
That was with BAM.
Okay.
Yeah. With BAM, that's primarily all that I use now. NalMed's a little bit tougher to get, a little bit more expensive. And so we rely on BAM in the park, in the Smokies. Okay.
And then question for you, Rich. I asked Ryan this before the recording started, but when you guys were using BAM, you and Lindsay, how many of those bears were free range situations, or do you use BAM in a free range situation?
Yeah, we very rarely do any kind of free range situations. I don't think any of those were. Most of that was during the research project where we were foothold snares and culvert traps, was the majority of our captures. And then, of course, all the den work. Carl, I will add just one last thing. It's kind of breaking news, and maybe some folks here know about it, but Dan Hagerman and Cullen Marutsky, they were both pharmacists who worked at Wildlife Pharmaceuticals when they were a company. They've come back together, and have formed a new company called Capture Lab RX. And keep an eye on them. They weren't licensed in maybe 5 or 6 states in 25, but they were planning on being licensed in the majority of states in 2026. And they are going to work on a custom bear formulation with folks that are hesitant to move away from dissociatives. They're talking about adding a touch of ketamine to the BAM platform, which might be useful. The idea is to give the combo a little stronger induction and anesthesia, but not negatively impact the reversibility. So these guys seem really, really on it. I've talked to them about the warning and how frustrating it is. They plan to address that. And then it was brought up earlier, some of the challenges with the new drug company. What the heck's the name of it? Begins with a W.
Wedgwood.
Wedgwood, thank you. They've reduced the BUD, the best use date, down to 30 days, maybe 60 every now and then. And these guys are saying, no way, that's really, really being overly conservative. And so they're going to do some research into what that BUD should be. So anyway, just some breaking news, and it sounds like we're going to have some more choices here soon.
Okay, great. Thanks. Mark, you're up. Question.
Okay. Thank you. Mark Vieira, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I was just reviewing our retired vet, Lisa Wolf's paper from 2019 on NalMed-A and oxygen. And as part of the manager's discussions, this idea of supplemental oxygen has come up before, and I think two of the three of you guys mentioned it. So, in Lisa's work with eight yearling bears using blood chemistry and pulse ox, I think everybody was under 90%, hypoxic potentially with NalMed-A. And I certainly understand the desire to not have to carry supplemental oxygen. But I guess if the three or whomever wanted to respond just a little bit more on sort of empirically what you've seen with oxygen saturation rates on both drugs, and just maybe kind of go down the panel a little bit more on, at least in Colorado, it's something we do emphasize our staff having and carrying for black bears in either the spring, fall or spring. And I guess just looking for some more thoughts on the value of supplemental oxygen. Thank you.
I can jump in. Hopefully my phone battery holds up. But so, like I said, that was me who mentioned about not using supplemental oxygen. I've never used supplemental oxygen on BAM. But if it's something you have and is available, I think over time, once you get extended workups, I think you will get some hypoxia issues in there. That's why I mentioned that 1 hour work time interval for the NalMed and the BAM work, doing the comparing pulse oximetry and blood gas. All of our workups were within an hour, and we didn't see any statistical difference in oxygen saturation from beginning of workup to the end of workup. But, if you're looking at things like, if you don't have pulse oximetry, you're looking at capillary refill. Metatomatine you will not see good oxygen perfusion by looking at capillary refill. And pulse oximetry has never really been, when I compared the two, all the pulse oximetry and most of the bears that we did on both those studies, it just wasn't good. It wasn't a good representation of, and there was statistical differences between the two of looking at oxygen saturation and pulse oximetry always being on the low end, and oxygen blood gas work being on the upper end of that. And like I said, none of our bears ever dropped in below the 90s, because when it drops below the 90s, maybe that's when you do need to start looking at supplemental oxygen.
Ryan or Brie, either of you have comments on that?
Yeah, so our field staff never uses supplemental oxygen. So the study that we led, none of those bears had received supplemental oxygen. But I will say we did not get the best data on how those bears were breathing. Our field staff would write notes like respiration was good, or we would maybe get one respiratory rate, but we weren't getting like repeat numbers to be able to really do any sort of analysis. That being said, I am always in favor of using supplemental oxygen, especially when using BAM and NalMed, but it's just not something that our field staff has regular access to.
Hey, Carl, one more thing. I think if as you move into using BAM and things like that, a lot of people are pretty hesitant into switching drug protocols. I know we all kind of get set in our ways, and I think going from a dissociative drug to a sedative-based drug, one of the biggest things that I saw was irregular breathing patterns. And it may be deep, it may be shallow, it may hold their breath for a couple of minutes. And I think that's really hard if you're into monitoring and you're looking at consistent breathing across it. I think if you try to start using BAM, I think one of the biggest things that people get worried about is the irregular breathing patterns. And that's something that I don't really even pay much attention to anymore after having done hundreds of bears. It's just something that's common with BAM and NalMed is very irregular breathing, and that's something that doesn't seem to affect recovery, induction, and things like that. But that's one of the things that really worries somebody who is using a new drug cocktail is the lack of breathing consistency.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. When we started using BAM this last year, pretty consistently on trap bears, we always have a pulse ox on them, whether we were using Tilazol, xylazine, or BAM. With Tilazol, we would get a lot of the oxygen saturation levels down around 90, sometimes a little bit lower, but breathing was very consistent, 12 breaths per minute, 14 breaths per minute. With BAM, very irregular breathing. They would take a few deep breaths and then nothing for 30 or 40 seconds and then a few more, but their oxygen saturation was always right up at 100%. So good comment. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. Dan Bjornley, Fish and Wildlife Service, polar bear program, but spent 22 years at Wyoming Game and Fish and large carnivore biologist, and did lots and lots of immobilizations with lots of different drug combinations, but Tilazol primarily, and then moved into BAM for a few years before. I was part of the 2018 project where the vet at the time, Mary Wood, and I went down to Colorado and worked with Lisa Wolf on those yearling bears, and did the blood gas in combination with the NalMed, just to see how things were working out. And we did see some of that hypoxia. I guess I hesitate to even call some of that like below 90 a hypoxia, when we would see that upper 80s, mid 80s with Tilazol on bears all the time. And it fluctuate kind of in that mid 90s to mid 80s. And I think Ryan's right that when we did the blood gas, the pulse ox is always lower than that, and so your hypoxia from a pulse ox is maybe not quite representative of what's really going on. But we did see arousals in BAM sometimes, not often, but not nearly as many as NalMed. But we used it quite a bit on black bears, never grizzly bears, any of it, because that I just we weren't going to jump into that for the safety issues. But as far as, we might have had one or two BAM arousals where we probably had a handful of NalMed arousals, a little more than that, probably not 10, but more than just a few. But I think what we found was, coming from Tilazol, you're really used to that pattern of how bears go under. And when you've got that, those BAM NalMed drugs, they're just not as quick. And when you think you've got a bear, say we got a snare bear that's up in a tree, it slides down, it gets to the ground, it lays there, you give it another 5 minutes or so, and you come in and you start working on it. That's too soon. That's you're gotta, which normally you would do with Tilazol. But with the BAM NalMed stuff, we were having to wait 20 minutes or so, make sure it's positioned right, and then just back off and leave it alone for another 20 minutes. And then we didn't run into that stuff. But when we get in there, just even, after 10 minutes, sometimes you'd get that bear that just pops up and looks around and tries to walk off. And we would always have a safety snare on it when we were working, even with culverts, try to make sure that we don't have bears just getting into stuff or hurting people. And then with the den work, we just never used any of those. We would use Tilazol straight up because we weren't, we're going to leave them in the den anyway. And so we'll just let them recover after that. But yeah, that reduced respiration, especially during the den time. It just wasn't worth the risk of trying to use any of these drugs, and we didn't need to reverse them anyway. So That's just kind of my 2 cents on those things. So.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Anybody else? Rich, I see you put something into the chat regarding the capture tarp. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. That's from Carl and Lindsay and I's manual from 22. It's really performed well. It is a little pricey to make, but very, very sturdy.
Brie, go ahead. You have a question.
I was just going to throw, for the people that are doing free range capture, about 75-80% of my bears are free range darted in the park with BAM. And I may be working a bear up on a picnic table with 100 people standing around watching me. And I just don't have those arousal problems. Never have. And I hope that continues. And it may be just my Tennessee bears are a little, maybe they're a little thinner, a little leaner than the fatter bears up there and that other guys are dealing with. But usually I think Dan is correct on when I free range a bear, I usually give it 3 minutes. If it disappears out of sight before I start trying to find that animal, we don't use telemetry darts. Usually I can just walk up, observe the animal. One thing I didn't hear anybody mention is that BAM and NalMed seem to work a little differently than those dissociative drugs as far as those animals going under anesthesia. Like take ketamine, for example. When those bears on ketamine, typically they will sit down and lay down like that. BAM and NalMed, those bears tend to stand until they are completely ready to fall over. And a lot of times they will fall over head first. And we've lost a bear due to an airway issue that fell nose first and just lost its airway before we got to it. But we do free range a lot of bears, but front shoulder with new darts, and we are pretty consistent with it. And it's the best mousetrap that I found in immobilizing black bears.
Thanks, Ryan. Marie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that as probably in every other agency, our field staff has a really variable level of experience with chemical immobilization drugs, especially newer drugs like NalMed-A. And so, that may have been part of the reason why we saw so many arousals, was that our staff weren't, giving the animals enough time to go down and thought that they were down and then started handling them, and then they actually weren't. So yeah, just something I wanted to bring up. And then one more thing, just going back to what Rich was saying about Capture Lab RX. So yeah, that's actually located in Laramie, Wyoming. And just so people are aware, they have come out with a drug called CAP, which is pretty much like double concentrated BAM. So that might be another option for people to use for black bears as well. We're actually doing a study right now testing it out in mule deer, but just wanted people to be aware that might be another option.
Thanks, Brie. Do one of you, Rich or somebody, want to address the question in the chat on human exposure? Chris just asked recommendations on standard operating procedures in the field for human exposure.
Yeah, and I feel like, and I'm just going off the cuff here, having kind of co-taught a course with Mark Johnson, I think it's very similar to what you would get in Telesol, which is administer the reversal. If you can hopefully calculate the amount that went in, but then of course also, get to help. And I think it's just the same responses you would have with Telesol, of course, but you don't have that reversal. So it's administer the reversal and get to medical attention.
Yeah, and our vet had told us that, and I thought he was going to be on this today, but he's not. He had told us that give the victim every bit of atipamezole that you have in your kit. It's not going to hurt them, and it's going to need more than just the regular reversal dose.
Hey, I can chime in on that. This is one of the big hurdles that when we started using BAM, that we as the National Park Service nationwide really wanted to come together and have a working, I won't say a working, but a plan for human reversal. And we actually do have a plan. If somebody is interested in what that human exposure plan looks like, please reach out to me and I can get that to you. And you can look at it, because it's one of those things that I think the heavy medetomidine dose is enough. There have been a few cases out there where, people were on respirators for, 24 hours plus. I don't think there's been any fatalities that I know of from BAM exposure, but I think it could be if you're not careful. So before you start down that rabbit hole, just know that we do have a plan in place. And I think it's the atipamezole hits really, really hard. From what we've seen, I totally would not give anybody all the atipamezole if there wasn't exposure. On my personal self, my exposure kit is I carry 1 milliliter of naltrexone and 1 milliliter of atipamezole, and those are given IM if I were to succumb, and then rescue breathing on top of that. And then I have my exposure protocol in my kit that will go with me to the doctor's office. And I think that's really important. Having those protocols in place is really clutch for any heavy alpha 2s. Those major respiratory depressants, I think those are really, really important to have aligned before you go down that path. And you can reach out to me. Like I said, my name is Ryan Williamson. I'm at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I'm sure that y'all can figure out how to get a hold of me.
Thanks, Ryan. Kristen.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks. Kristen Magnuson, veterinarian with Yukon government here in the north of Canada. Just wanted to echo Ryan's statement there, and also another bonus, if you do have supplementary oxygen along, if you have human exposure, that can be helpful. Also just wanted to share really quick here. I know we're talking about bears, but, and I don't have experience using BAM in bears. Thanks for those who spoke today sharing their experience. I do have experience using BAM in smaller carnivores, wolves, and we use BAM with a little bit of additional medetomidine for free-ranging wolves on the tundra here, and we have not had any spontaneous arousal. Just wanted to share that, and we've done 45 free-ranging wolves with that protocol now, and no concerns with spontaneous arousal. Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. Go ahead, Brie.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on human exposure. So we teach our capture course once a year for all of our field staff. And we always teach our staff to draw up reversals first and have them ready before even drawing up the drugs, and to have them in the field at all times. And then we also provide each of our field personnel with Narcan to have. So it's kind of their choice for the naltrexone, if they'd rather go Narcan or naltrexone, but then definitely atipamezole as well. And then get to a hospital as quickly as possible, which is not always very quick in Wyoming.
Rich?
No, definitely not. Yeah, Carl, I was just going to touch on, I really appreciate Brie chiming in on that new drug called CAP. So for the folks that weren't here at the start of the conversation, if any of you are like me, where you cross species, and for me, it's mountain lions. We tried BAM on lions, and we have a Panthera group here working on lions too. And they've been adjusting their dosage for cats to 2 to 2.5 times the number of dose being recommended for BAM. And I've also heard from others that tigers are ×4. So that's been taking away their ability to go to a smaller dart. But this cap, which is a double BAM, this may be, and I would contact them first and ask them, this may be the platform that we need for, say, grizzly bears and for the larger cat species. That was news to me today. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, Rich. Go ahead and lower your hand if you could. Anybody else? Brian.
Yeah, this is Brian Scheich with the Florida Wildlife Commission. I haven't switched over to using these oximeters yet. It's been a few years since I've had to immobilize bears. I do a lot of hair corrals these days, but when I talked to a vet about it, there's a lot of problems that sometimes arise when you have really dark skin. So I was curious, where do you guys hook these things up? Do you hook it up to their tongue or some other skin that's lighter, or do you not have problems with the misread of the oxygen from the darker skin tone?
I think part of that is maybe some of that pigmentation, but you know, the thinnest skin imaginable, and usually that's, you know, obviously a bear's tongue is not that thin, but typically the tongue is about the only place that you could try it. You may try it on the tips of the ears, but you may have to shave an ear to get down there. And that may be part of why you're not seeing a good representation by pulse oximeters on bears.
Right. Yeah, the vet that I talked to about using it when we were trying to maybe get some, because, you know, you put it on their tongue, but then they lick a lot, or they move their head, they knock it off. And he kind of said, you could use it, but I advise you not to just purely go by numbers. You just still got to watch it breathe and make sure it's doing things. And I just didn't switch over to that yet. So it's really common from a lot of the comments here. So I figured someone's got a lot of those kinks worked out. Thanks.
Great conversation. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. This